Thank you for having me, Tom. It's great to be here. And good morning to you. Good afternoon from Europe. I'm based here in Italy. Buon pomeriggio.
Where in Italy?
Actually, up in the north in the Alps, right on the Austrian border in the Dolomites, in a very beautiful place.
Lovely. What a wonderful place to live in the summer. Could you tell us about the company and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Emapta, we are a global outsourcing company. We actually operate in over 10 countries with just over 10,000 team members. I've been in the business for over 6 years, 6.5. I used to live in the Philippines. That's where our biggest operation is. I've lived there for 7 years, and that's where I joined Emapta and just recently moved back to my native Italy. And so I'm now based in Europe and oversee our operation here in Europe, which is actually North Macedonia, right next to Greece. So yeah, we're kind of global, but also try to be very local in each of the countries where our teams are located.
So, could you talk to us a little bit about the intersection of outsourcing, which my audience is well aware of, but they don't understand the intersection with GDPR?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is probably one of the most common questions I get from prospective and existing clients and partners here in Europe, but also beyond, especially as we work with a lot of global businesses who do business in Europe and hence need to be aware of and compliant with GDPR requirements as well. I suppose one of the common questions or concern is whether outsourcing is even allowed in under GDPR and whether there is even such a thing as could you even outsource or do that as part of your business strategies if you need to be compliant with GDPR. I always say the short answer is yes, you can, and we've got you covered. We as an established company know exactly what to do to support you in the compliance. What I always highlight there is that the compliance requirement remains with the company, whether they're in the UK, whether they're in Ireland, Europe, or even in the US, but want to be GDPR compliant. Even if they work with an outsourced company or outsourcing provider, their liability and their accountability remains with them. But what's important is to select a company that helps them achieve this compliance, and that's what we do in many ways.
Why do you feel there's so much uncertainty around organizations outsourcing and GDPR?
I suppose there is a lot of concern because of the complexity of, cross-border data transfers. There's also heavy penalties for non-compliance. So when part of the service or the processes are outsourced, there is a lot of fear over potential penalties. And I suppose there's also a bit of a misconception over loss of control of the data once you do work with a third party. And because of that, the initial probably knee-jerk reaction from many businesses in Europe is, oh no, we can't outsource because it's just too risky. But then once we actually go a step further and really look into what can be done in a shared responsibility between the client and the provider, we actually know and find solutions to establish a GDPR compliant environment, even with an offshore team.
Now, is this data what I might call business or financial data, or is it personally identifiable information, PII, a combination of both, or perhaps even something different?
It's a combination of both or more. It depends on the business, right? So we work with clients in all industry, whether it's mortgage, sales and marketing, software providers, financial firms, and so on. So every company's nature of business is different, and the type of data that they process and they use for their transaction differs per every individual client. And that's actually where the GDPR scoping process from our side with our clients begins. This is the kind of conversation we have. We try to understand what business do they have, what type of data do they process, and which aspects of the data is going to be actually touched by offshore team members. Is it PII? Is it actually financial data? And then the respective guidelines have to be established.
So I'm going to translate that into compliance speak. I would say you just did a risk assessment.
Yes.
And what do you see as maybe two or three of the top risk areas when your company does this initial assessment?
So yeah, one of the first aspects is to do a mapping of the data flow. So to see, okay, where is the data currently housed? How is it being managed on the client side, on their home turf? And which aspects of the data are going to be processed offshore and in what ways with what access? Not to go into too much detail because obviously it's hard to summarize a whole risk assessment process in a couple of minutes, but basically our team members, they are legally employed by us, but they are exclusively assigned to our clients. They work on IT hardware that is owned, preset, and pre-configured by us to ISO 27001 and 27701 security standards. So the workstations are secure and managed by us. But the team members work on those workstations, and from there, they will access the data of the client in their respective tools. So the risk assessment there goes into looking what tools are being used, who has access to these tools, who manages the control points for those tools, which should be and should remain on the client side. And Emapta provides basically the infrastructure and the workstation security assessment on the back end to facilitate that secure access.
So once you implement the strategy you have decided upon, do you then engage in some type of ongoing monitoring or oversight to make sure the strategy is working? And if not, if tweaks or changes or upgrades or updates need to be made, you're able to do that on a continuous basis?
In essence, yes. However, the updates of the strategy will remain with our clients in the sense that we do the initial scoping and setup with our clients, again, customized to their respective needs. And then that includes the workstation setup on our end. Now, our responsibility is to make sure we continuously update and monitor the security of the workstation as well as the network within our offices where the team members work, so that as well as the whole compliance in terms of occupational health and safety, employees' well-being, fair workers' compensation, making sure it's anti-modern slavery, like all that aspect on the employee, which also includes deep training on data security best practices that we do during onboarding as well as yearly renewals. When it comes to the review of the data process and the processes flow map, that remains with the client. In a For UK based clients, there is actually an international data transfer agreement that is signed, or IDTA, that is signed in addition to our service agreement. For EU businesses, it's a DPA that includes the standard contract clauses as well. So those contractual agreements flow on top of our basic service agreement. And these contracts also include a right to audit. So not sorry, the team members, I mean the clients have the right to request to audit or request for an update. And so that's usually done. Many of our established clients, enterprise level or medium to large companies, if they have their own internal compliance teams or risk management teams, what actually happens is that they have yearly risk assessment or vendor review processes where many of them are done through online portals, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And that's where they will request regular updates and information and spot checks from us that we will deliver. And if they need to pivot or again adapt their strategy, then that's what we will collaborate with them on.
You will soon find out I'm a complete, total, and utter geek on all things compliance. So we're going to geek out a little bit by taking a bit of a deeper dive into subject access request. And this is perhaps one area that scares Americans more than anything and is, as I don't want to say misunderstood, but I would say not understood as any other area of a GDPR. So could I maybe start by asking you, what is a subject access request and how do you help a client build out operational confidence to handle an SAR?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you would be geeking out at the compliance level. So this is, I can probably not do justice on that, but more on the practical operational side of it, a subject or SAR or DSARs, as they're often referred to. This is basically the data subject. So basically, the owner of the data, let's say if it's PII, it's the personal identifiable information. Every subject has the right to request a company to delete their records. When this is done, then they can reach out to the company, and the company is required to respond to this request within 72 hours. This request needs to be, or this timeline needs to be met, even if part of the process is outsourced or offshore. And that is probably one part that scares companies, because if part of that process is not their own, they need to make sure they have a thought out process and a partner in place that can help them achieve this. How do we do this? So, firstly, the clear workflows for the DSARs is usually done on the client side because, again, the compliance requirement is on their end. But the additional agreements that I mentioned earlier, it's a business processing agreement if it is for HIPAA compliance in the US, but if it's for GDPR, it's the data DPA and the IDTA. These clearly outline Emapta's responsibility to collaborate with our clients and provide this information. From our side, this is handled by our internal information security and risk team. So we have a team that will receive these requests and will then be able to provide the information. Since all workstations are owned, preset, and pre-configured by Emapta, we will be able to provide the appropriate information. I'm really keeping it very short here, not to go into too much detail, but I hope this is what you were thinking of.
Are you able to bring any technological tools or other solutions to help in this process?
I know that many of our clients actually have tools that work on this, that help them in this process. Some of the ones that I just recently used are some of those case management tools like UpGuard or OneTrust, that many, especially of the US enterprise clients, they already have established tools like that. There are also automated search tools for identifying personal data across systems, but on our end, these are not in place at the moment, since again, most of the data is owned, managed, and hosted by our clients themselves, and we are merely providing the platform for them.
And now we have to get even more near and dear to my heart as a lawyer because we're going to talk about outsourcing contracts with GDPR obligations. What are some of the key areas you would suggest that a client look at or put in the contracts that you typically would get involved with?
So, firstly, it's establishing very clear responsibilities over who is the owner and who is the controller and of the data and who is the processor. So this is basically again referencing the DPA is what clearly outlines that. For us, this is always a initial conversation where we really go into a lot of detail because our model of outsourcing is a little bit different to the traditional end-to-end outsourcing where let's say a company wants part of their taxes being reconciliated and they want to get it back at the end of the month and it's just done by the outsourcing company and they get it back. Ours is different because for us, we provide a high quality talent. We legally employ and set them up, as I mentioned, but then we fully integrate them into the client's business. So they actually they integrate and become part of the client's team for all intents and purposes and are directly managed by the client. So because of that, the lines are a little blurred and it's very important to identify very clearly who owns the data and who processes it. Emapta, in this case, we are basically a sub-processor. So the part of the contracts or what's also included in those DPAs is also the breach notification clauses. Make sure that we support the 72 hours window for the GDPR compliant of the SARs. We also have security measures and audit rights that are explicitly stated so that the client can have the assurance that they will be able to remain compliant when a DSAR come in. And it's also some liability and indemnity clauses for non-compliance in case there were any breaches that this is very clearly outlined. Very high level, but yeah, that's the high level answer there.
You have missed your calling in life. You should be talking about GDPR compliance. That was great.
Thank
Uh,
you.
you should really just go around and put shows on. But the thing that intrigues me about GDPR is certainly in America, the government can come knocking and say, we want to audit you on topics one, two, or three. And then you have to be audit ready and respond. But under GDPR, an individual can essentially ask through a subject access request for that same information. So, how do you stay audit ready literally across geographies and vendors, or how do you help a company do that?
I have to say that in our partnership with the client, it's really the client who already set that up themselves, because even prior to engaging with us as an outsourced company, they need to make sure that they have the measures in place to be able to be compliant, so they already have those frameworks. But what we do when we start engaging with them, we have that conversation about looking, okay, how audit ready are they, even what is their setup in terms of the records for processing, the risk assessment, the vendor evaluation, what is their process, so that we also know, like for example, the before mentioned clients, that they have the yearly vendor assessments. This is something we would like to know in advance. They already give us the schedule. They say, look, every February we send out our vendor requests, and we usually pick, most of them pick, firstly, some of them standard clauses that they always check on, making sure that the insurance and the insurance forms are always updated, so that they check all of their vendors, make sure those records are updated. Then they usually take some spot checks on other liability aspects where we just ask documentation from us. Now, from our side, what does Emapta do to make sure we are audit ready? It's hard because we basically always have to be ready because we work with over 900 clients, and when any of them reaches out to us, we always need to be ready. So in a nutshell, what we do to be ready is the overall setup of our information security team and our IT operation. So we have, not to bore you with too many details because it's probably, we're veering a little bit away from compliance and more on the IT service delivery, but so we have a 24/7 IT service desk that provides the support to our team members on their workstations, anything that they need, hardware, software. We have an information security team that also provides the workstation patch management on those computers and does the regular assessments as well. And then we have a risk and compliance team from a legal perspective who makes sure we remain up to date on our own insurance policies, that the policies that we have are accurately applied, and we also do internal spot checks and audits to make sure that all the policies that we have implemented within our company are actually applied. And so basically we're just we just need to make sure we do our job really, so that when we do, if and when a request from our clients come, then all we have to do, making it sound very simple, is just go to the right department, ask them what information we need so that they can pull it up. And so it's all about a continuous improvement and regular auditing of our own processes to make sure that we can actually, bring that to the table for our clients.
So you started that answer by saying we were veering away from compliance into operations. And I was about to interrupt you and say, no, it's all compliance. But you gave the best answer I've ever heard of how it is all compliance. And what you have just explained is how you have integrated compliance literally into the business operations. So that as you described that process, you called it operations. I heard compliance through the process, but what it made me realize is you have wedded the two together to a seamless operation. And that's the goal of compliance, to be so embedded in the operations that the client doesn't see this as compliance, they see this as operations. And you're able to see the whole process. So kudos.
No, that actually, if I may add something there, it's actually, you mentioned in the intro that I am also the ESG lead for Emapta. So I also
Right.
lead our ESG initiatives and our B Corp certification. And the same concept of what you just mentioned about seeing compliance as part of operations and just part of what we do the same even with our ESG strategy. Like we did not go to our department leaders and say, oh, you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do this so that we can become a B Corp certified company or that we have a great ESG rating. Instead, what we did, we went to each department and say, tell us what you're doing. And then we collated all the things that they're doing. And from there, we realized, okay, great, all the things that we're already doing, this is enough for us to become B Corp certified, because we really believe in that organic way of, I mean, even ESG, a lot of it is around compliance and governance, right? And so for me, it's all about, if me as a senior leader and I go to other departments and say, on top of the other 500 things that you need to do today, you also have to do this compliance report and that, either it doesn't get done or it gets done halfway and then it gets forgotten the moment that they submit the report. So that's not really sustainable. So we've really found the other ways to say, let them, as in them in each department, drive their agenda on improving their business and their department for the metrics that they do, and then just make sure that it's aligned. Of course, we still give guidance. We also, our risk and governance team absolutely sends out policies that need to be updated. We do that too, but we try to really integrate it into the regular operation, because otherwise it's not really going to be sustainable, in my opinion.
And if I could end by asking you, what's the one piece of advice you would give to business leaders looking to future proof their outsourcing strategy in light of GDPR?
I suppose don't be afraid. Firstly, don't see GDPR as something that's going to keep you from either outsourcing or, if not even outsourcing, but from thinking global in terms of the access of talent. Don't think that, oh, I have to be GDPR compliant and that's why I cannot even think about hiring somebody that is not in my home country, because you would really limit yourself or your business on amazing opportunities. Because if you actually see GDPR as an opportunity to strengthen the trust with your customers, then it's not just a burden, it's actually something that builds long-term partnership and gives your business a long-term foundation.
And unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you, find out any more about Emapta, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
Yeah, we'd love to be connected. I know I talked a lot already, but if you want to talk more or really, learn more about us and how we can help you specifically, you find us on the net with emapta.com. It's emapta.com, but also on LinkedIn, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well and reach out to us anytime.
I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me. It was great speaking with you.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day, one actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.